Hello there, YouTubers. CD Mangaka here, and I'm going to be going over one of the more underplayed parts of the 5.22 update that Riot has posted that um, actually has a lot of implications into what the state of the game could be. And I'll discuss it both from a solo queue perspective as well as a competitive play perspective, just because I think it has huge ramifications for both. So let me go ahead and just switch my layout of my stream over to this format so we can briefly kind of look at the section of changes that I'm talking about. So first off, we have the changes to turrets and to minions. These are the two changes I want to focus on in this particular video, just because I want to focus the discussion on this point to disregard, everything else going on with the preseason changes so far. So the turrets are being changed in a very interesting way, which I like on paper, up until you introduce the second half of this discussion, which is the minion changes. So, turrets, inner towers, they don't have a shield anymore. That's okay. It was fairly negligible already. Now you deal damage to structures based on either your total AD or half of your ability power. Bonus AD, actually, not total AD. Bonus attack damage as well as your base attack damage. Or half your ability power. So this helps out AP mages who are building up itemization, favoring that ability power rather than getting any bonus AD, and so that they can do comparable damage to structures that attack damage carries, or champions that build AD would. So it's a cool little change. So, but that's the small point. The bigger point comes with turret resistances. So all turrets are going to have a base resistance of armor magic resist of 0. So at the start of the game, you're going to be able to hit them full punch. Now, every minute, the turrets will gain 2 armor and 2 magic resistance up to a cap of 30. So this means it takes 15 minutes for the turrets to scale to their tankiest form, if you will. Outer towers will begin to scale right at the start of the game, so it's going to be about the 15-minute mark when they are scaled up to their 30 armor and magic resistance. Inner towers start scaling at 15 minutes, so and if you can get to that tower before that 15-minute mark, it's going to have no resistance for you to push down. Inhibitor Nexus towers will be in that scaling at 30 minutes, so they'll finish scaling by 45 minutes into the game. So if you can end the game before then, you're going to have an easier time taking the inhibitor Nexus towers. So in a way, it's kind of like, it makes sense. It's like, okay, if you want to end the game fast, it's going to be a little easier for you, but if you're able to stall out the game, then you're rewarded with having a more durable base. So, it's change that kind of makes sense from that perspective of helping out scaling compositions with just defense. But this change also does something where it encourages a fast pushing kind of play style, because if you can get into those bases before these resistances build up, then you're going to have an easier time burning through that base. So it kind of begins to create this environment where the game is more about early tower pushing and snowballing before these towers can become tankier for teams to take. And therefore, they're easier to fall, they're easier to get more gold, which, by the way, inner and outer towers give more local gold now. Now, to also bring up a point, though, all the towers have had their health increased to compensate for them losing this base 100 armor and magic resist at the start of the game. So I'm not sure. I think that they would probably be tankier by the time they finish scaling. I haven't done the exact math, but they'll be comparable at first, is probably the safe thing to say. They'll just have more flat health, and then they'll just gain some resistances to make that health more effective. So this is an okay change to the game. It gives opportunity. It gives kind of a focused play style for early aggressive compositions to go to, and it also gives some leverage to late game scaling comps and rewards them for being able to stall out. Then we get to minions and the pushing changes. So here you go. If your team's average level is higher than the enemy's, your minions deal 10% bonus damage to enemy minions. If you've taken cumulatively more turrets than the enemy, damage is further increased by 10% for each turret you have over your opponents. Let's go ahead and read through all these changes first. Then there's an enrage passive. If your team's average level is at least 3 levels higher than the enemy's, and you've taken 2 or more towers in a given lane, your minions in that lane deal 90% more damage to enemy minions. There's a second half of this bonus as well. It's damage reduction. So if you have a higher average level than your enemy team, your minions take less damage from their minions. equal to a number like right here, tower differential and level differential. And if you have that same bonus for the enrage passive, this is ironclad. If your team's average level is at least 3 higher than the enemy's, and you've taken 2 or more towers in a given lane, your minions in that lane take 7 less damage from enemy minions, which I assume also stacks with this minion damage reduction right here. This is where the changes become incredibly disgusting, to put it mildly, and the fact that that's mild is kind of concerning to say the least. Let me go ahead and switch back to this overlay for right now. That way we can kind of focus on it. So what we're kind of seeing here is that if a team takes a tower earlier, the tower is less tanky, thus therefore easier to take, and it's more efficient then to take those towers earlier, so then you can get those rewards from the tower, a bit of like local experience and that bit of local gold from it, the global gold from it as well, for, you know, with spending less time and less resources into it. Furthermore, if you take those towers, your minions will just push the enemy out. So 10%, 20%, you know, it kind of sounds like this like weird little, okay, you know, like, what does that really mean for it? How much damage is that going to mean? We can do the numbers on it, but what we can basically understand just at a conceptual level is that if your minions are taking less damage from the enemy minions, as well as dealing more damage to the enemy minions, your waves are automatically going to be pushing, or the waves of the team that has this advantage, either in terms of levels or in terms of towers, is going to be pushing in your favor, okay? So what does this do? This creates brutal snowballs within the game, all right? Now, looking at the enrage passive, I would comfortably say that if your team's average level is at least 3 levels higher than the enemy levels. So I mean, you have to have like someone massively winning lane, like 2 lanes probably winning massively, and the other one having a slight lead to get a number like that. If you get to that kind of a point, as well as having 2 or more towers in a given lane, if you're at that point in the game, I feel like it's just okay, like you've already won kind of a card being put out. Go ahead and just end the game pretty soon. Now, why does the minion pressure and this, you know, automatic pushing on the waves create a snowball? Well, you know, there's a couple things. First off, you get free global pressure. If your minions just automatically outpush the enemy minions, then you don't have to do anything. You don't have to call the enemy minion wave. You don't have to set up a slow push. Your wave is just automatically going to go push into the enemy team. Now, one could say, okay, but if I can't just, you know, but if my lane automatically pushes, then doesn't that mean I really can't freeze a lane effectively? Because if my lane pushes, then I can't, you know, deny the enemy farm, keep the lane like under my tower, things like that, or at least it's not going to be as easy to do. That is kind of true, and so one would think that, okay, you know, the gold and the experience in the mini wave is going to be pushing back for free and give the enemy player some time to farm. But what happens when those enemy players then want to turn the tide around and say, okay, I've been able to recover a little bit, I'm still behind a level or 2, but I've hit this power spike, I got this item now, let's try and push this wave out, you know, or, you know, let's like try to group here for a siege, for example. Well, then you have the fact that your minions are automatically going to be losing to the enemy team's minions, and that's going to hurt a team's ability to play from behind using the minion waves to crash in the tower. Now, this probably would result in a huge emphasis on just having that upfront wave clear to kill the enemy minion line before those minion lines even clash. But this kills side lane manipulation still. Okay, if you group for that one objective there and you leave the side lanes unattended, you're not going to be able to set up like these split push pressure games from behind. You have to donate a champion into that lane and, you know, fight either, you know, like equal numbers advantage, maybe the numbers disadvantage. And in situations where you're falling behind, you're not getting early towers, you're falling behind in levels, you can't really do that. You're going to have to force number advantages in those fights if you're behind in levels. And if you can't have the side waves going in your favor, creating free pressure for you, chipping down those towers, you're not going to be getting like anything out of it, and you're not going to have access to those resources in those fights. Furthermore, this also can affect laning phase, all right? So let's talk about like a solo queue aspect for a moment. Say I got a top laner, and he's feeding, all right? He's getting crushed, jungler's been up there a couple times, he's behind a couple of levels there, and his tower goes down, okay? Let's say that happens. Now suddenly, in my lane, let's say bottom lane or mid lane, either or, suddenly my minion wave isn't going to be pushing as strong as my enemy's mid lane. Or minion wave, excuse me. And because of that, suddenly, you know, the enemy doesn't have to expend as much cooldowns, as much spells, as much resources to push his minion wave into mine. So my minions will die faster. This means that it's harder for me to pick a fight in my lane against that laner, because if I go on in that damage and we don't have an equal minion line or something, then I'm going to be at a disadvantage because I'm going to be fighting him and his minion advantage. If I want to keep that advantage neutral, then I have to expend my cooldowns, which I would probably want to try instead to use on him to get kills on him, pressure him out of lane, things like that, to instead cull this minion wave that is just pushing into me. So this means that my resources and my way of winning lanes suddenly has to be turned into just making sure that I don't get pushed into my tower all the time and get this pressure on me. And that's, we don't know the scale in which this will happen, though. Again, 10%. Probably is a little smaller than we're making it, or making how one would imagine it to be. But the case would still be the same, and these slight edges will still exist to a degree. Now, as far as competitive play goes, all right, what are the implications for that? Well, first off, if you're a team that wants to take the game at a slower pace, you're okay with keeping the towers up, then your whole plan in the early game has to be stopping the enemy team from taking towers or trying to trade towers back. So you either have to stop them from fast pushing, draft to have an equal or good fast push to them, or be able to, I think I already said stop their fast push, because if they get a turret lead on you, okay, then you're have to fight this superior minion advantage for you in all of your lanes. It's gonna be hard to come back from that. All right, and then if you want to say, okay, they're going to take some towers over there, fine, let's go ahead, take Dragon in the bottom lane. That Dragon's not going to do shit for you early, and pardon my language right there. It's not going to give you the same kind of advantages, It's going to give you a little more AD and AP, but if you have to burn that extra stats on just making sure that your minion wave, okay, is going to be able to not get pushed in by the enemy minion wave, because you have to focus on culling their minion wave super hard rather than being able to freely trade all these things, you're not going to have opportunities to really make a play back into the game. And if the enemy team gets these turret advantages on you, all right, then once again at a time, okay, you can kind of maybe freeze lane a little bit, but then having your minions and being able to set up slow pushes to crash into towers, just to slowly chip away at objectives, denying the enemy experience, it's going to be harder for you to do, and you're going to have to commit to pushing that lane. If the enemy answers you, it's very difficult in these circumstances for a team to really play from behind when it comes to handling these minion waves suddenly. And so you have to either, match the enemy team and trade towers with them, be able to make it so that it's even all the way through, okay, or else you're going to probably just wind up losing the game because you can't siege, you can't push against the enemy minion waves because your minion waves just automatically lose to theirs. And that's something that's just very weird and frustrating to see, because we've seen Riot cull lane swaps before, back in Season 4 when they were really against it. They gave the bottom lane tower extra resistances to the top lane tower so that, hey, if you guys lane swapping fast, the team that gets the top side is going to have advantage there, blah, blah, blah. As well as a couple other changes because they didn't like it. As well as also considering their initiative in Season 5 where they tried to really curtail snowballing. But now, taking towers, getting level advantages, you just get free global pressure on the enemy team, and that's going to just push everything out. And suddenly, it's harder for them to make these comebacks because they have to have someone in those side lanes. They cannot have side lane control effectively in order to generate pressure, play around that pressure, to come back in these games. And this really hurts from behind play, really enforces an environment where the whole point of the game, early towers, early leads, snowball the game out really hard, which is just a weird thing to see Riot enforce this kind of direction into. In competitive play, because the Riot is also introducing the Rift Herald, the new monster in the Baron Pit for the first 20 minutes, that gives a bit of a mini Baron buff, I can almost see teams saying, hey, Dragon, it's worthless right now, because the games are going to be ending too fast for us to really stack up Dragon. It's going to be a waste of time for us, so let's put our duo on the top side, fight over the Rift Herald there, because there's the pushing power there. We can get it onto a person, then, our minion wave is going to have an advantage there. If we can take a tower in another lane, that's an even bigger advantage, because our wave is just going to beat theirs automatically. We can push us in a tower, we can open up these towers, and you can snowball the objective from there, and suddenly the game goes into this very top-side-centric game that revolves around tower pushing and snowballing the game into these, uncontrollable minion wave pushes that the enemy team can't really respond to because they can't just control the side lanes anymore. It's very weird to see that, and I don't particularly like that change, just because it's too snowbally. It takes too much elements away from the macro game. It stifles the ability for teams to play from behind, something that's a very exciting aspect of watching competitive League of Legends being played. In terms of solo queue, suddenly, someone losing in their lane and that resulting in early towers, things like that, can have a negative impact on you automatically just because suddenly you have to fight against a superior minion wave as well. And solo queue can grow even more snowbally than it already is, which for some people it's probably like okay in a way, just because like, oh good, we're losing here pretty hard, and now there's really nothing we can do, and so all right, 20 minutes, the game is like officially over. There is no hope for it. We can just move on to the next game. Quick wins, quick losses. But in terms of competitive play, I just don't like the environment that this proposes, and I've been told that some writers have been saying things kind of like, hey, this is a very experimental change, and to give you guys an idea of how experimental it actually is, this wasn't on the PBE. This minion change did not exist on the public beta environment. They literally are pushing out this live right now without testing it priorly. Now, we've seen Riot go back on a couple of changes before, though. There was some changes that didn't go through in the Season 5 update. I can't remember the exact details on them. And, it could be that this is very experimental, and Riot could say, okay, that's a very big mistake. Let's pull that one back. Let's not have that one go through. And honestly, that's what I hope it is. And the purpose of this video is to outline why this sort of change into the structure of the game is very bad. There's not counterplay to it. You just get automatically punished for it. It makes the game very unfavorably centered around towers, where stalling out the game, there's not enough room for teams to really stall out the game. There's not enough benefit for them to play from behind to really match that. It places a lot of power in early aggression that makes it probably the best way to play the game in the most efficient manner. And that is something, and having one of those kind of styles just like be so far outclassing the other, and taking away from oh hey, we can play around the dragon stacking game, but then we can't handle our lanes, and so it doesn't even matter that we're getting dragon control, and which, by the way, you would lose control of that objective, because if you can't push out your lanes, then you're not going to be able to generate pressure, get the enemy preoccupied with clearing waves, move on in, put the wards down, things like that. Then it really creates this pushing early focused game that is going to be very unhealthy for the state of the game, in my opinion. I want to raise awareness for that, so that we can give Riot this feedback and say, don't do it, please stop the fire, it burns, something like that. So this is just a topic I want to bring on up. I think I could write an article on this, but honestly, I'm more comfortable talking about it, just putting it out there for you guys. Thank you all for watching this video. I hope you guys kind of can see where I'm coming from on it. I don't know what your guys' thoughts are. I'd be very interested into hearing them. So either way, though, it looks like we're probably going to be stuck with this push going live, so we'll have to see how this actually plays on out. It's going to be a while before we see it in a competitive scenario, so unless things go really out of direction for Riot, or people really have a huge backlashing to it, then I don't know how it's going to really happen here. But if you don't like this change, be vocal about it. Don't be rude about it. Don't be vitriolic or toxic about it. Just say hey, this isn't fun for me to play with this kind of situation. This isn't a cool change. I want this retracted. Something like that. Take it to Reddit, take it to the forums, things like that. Because Riot will listen to the community on a couple of things, and if the negative reaction is strong enough, we've seen this before with when they proposed at least Sin rework that the community completely rejected. Then maybe we can turn this one around, and if you're not one for this change. So that's the advice that I want to put out there for you guys. So thank you all for watching this video. This is CD Mangaka, signing out.